Welcome. Each week, I am going to reflect on the previous week, drawing together themes and thinking about how the readings and our forums and the literature reviews when they begin and the syntheses, how all of these things come together. The first thing that I want to say about this past week is what a remarkable job everyone is doing in combining, analyzing, and absorbing the readings with relating the readings to your own stories, and how wonderfully you are supporting each other, and how openly you're expressing yourselves at this very early point in your time together. So I think this can only be a harbinger of a really positive learning experience for everyone. And I appreciate the professionalism with which everybody's writing. Nobody seems to be writing in the kind of shorthand you might use when you're writing texts or in conversation. Everybody's writing thoughtfully and coherently, so that everybody else can understand and fully participate. So that's wonderful. Let's think for a minute about scratching our eye. Let's think for a minute about definitions of stress, appraisal, and coping. So stress, as we're thinking about it, is the experience of internal or external demands that we perceive as taxing or exceeding our ability to cope. And those can be very different demands for different people. As you know, we all have days when the simplest thing will make us fly off the handle, and other days when we wake up and say to life, well, show me something I haven't seen. There's nothing I can't handle today. One interesting thing about the research of Lazarus and Folkman is that they repeatedly found that what they called daily hassles, like traffic or people being rude in the supermarket, or a tailgater, or I don't know, the copy machine not working, that the buildup of daily hassles actually caused more cumulative stress than did major life stressors, such as the death of a loved one or the loss of a job. So that's interesting, isn't it? And it certainly relates to one theme in your conversation about the importance of stress management, so that we are not reactive to those daily hassles. A little backstory here. In the 60s, there were two researchers who actually gave numerical values to a list of major life stressors. And then they said, if you got over a score of 300, then you were subject to mental or physical breakdown. Now, what's wrong with that picture? As you noticed in the readings, and as you discussed in your conversation, um, you can't give a quantitative value to stressors because everybody experiences stressors differently. So two people might experience the very same stressors in very different ways, or two people might have the same reaction to very different stressors. For example, when I was doing family therapy, I had a family who had been almost um, uh, non-functional in the grip of anxiety for a year because the whole family had been in the car and it had a fender bender um, uh, a year previous. A fender bender wouldn't be considered a major life event to many of us. However, their appraisal of the event was what caused the event to be so demanding on their coping resources. So first there's a stressor, and then there's appraisal, or the meanings we attach to a life demand or the way we interpret it. Appraisal is a very important intermediary between stress and coping. For example, in your family, if mental illness is interpreted as being possessed by the devil, the family's response to you and the support they seek is going to be very different than if they interpret mental illness as biological. So whether you how you appraise a situation is critical in determining how you will cope with it. As we've said, coping is strategies that are used to manage stressors that are perceived as as taxing, internal or external demands, and so those demands can be your own anxiety, and then you have to cope with your own anxiety. Or they can be the anxiety of a loved one, or it can be a car accident, or it can be your own physical illness. These demands can be internal or external. The reason that the definition talks about managing rather than mastery, as some of you pointed out, is that there are many stressors that cannot be mastered. For example, if you were diagnosed with HIV, you're not going to master that stressor and get rid of it. You'll always be dealing with it. If you have a death of a loved one, there's no fixed end point of grieving, but you will learn to manage that loss. So this idea of mastery is not applicable to the process of coping. As you discovered and pointed out in your conversation, there is no one right way to cope. There are many strategies for coping, and you did a great job of exploring for yourselves individually what your own strategies are and which ones are more or less counterproductive. But also, as you discovered, it's very important not to decide that some are inherently better than others and to impose that idea on your clients, because something that would work for you, like going for a 10-mile run, may not work for your client. And logical analysis may not work for your client. And certainly positive reappraisal is not something that you should ever encourage your client to do, like look on the bright side, because you're actually discounting the perspective that your client actually has. It's okay if you inherently look on the bright side, but it's not something that you can tell your client with any positive result. Another thing to think about with regard to coping is that every problem was an attempt to cope at some point. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to completely mess up my life and make myself miserable. As some of you mentioned, sometimes the ways of coping have negative consequences. For example, when it turns out that you find yourself solving every problem by drinking or taking a drug, then, as you also pointed out so beautifully, it not only doesn't solve the problem, but your primary relationship it becomes one between you and the substance, and you calculating how you can get to the substance or how soon you can get to the substance. And so the people in your life take on a secondary importance, or in extreme cases, no importance at all. You pointed out insightfully that that's the case with most any non-productive coping mechanism. For example, if you use too much distraction, or I can't think of something else, but as you're listening, I'm sure you will. But it's especially the case with substances that this will disrupt your ability to fulfill your life roles and to be there fully for the people that you want to be there for. Just as there are cultural differences in appraisal of stressors, there are also a wide-ranging cultural differences in normative coping efforts and coping styles. So it's important to understand what's normative in the context of your client. For example, there may be traditional practices that are highly valued normative ways of coping within your client's native community, for example. And your job then as a professional helper is to make an alliance with the natural or traditional helpers, so that your different strategies are not counteracting one another. And you can do this simply by let a meeting with your client and the traditional helper, and um, what I have had success doing uh, in the past, success with doing something like that, is simply saying that I'm here to be useful in whatever way I can, and the client and the traditional helper are in charge of the healing process. And these are the resources that I have available, and the access points that I can provide. But it's you can unwittingly discount your own usefulness as a professional helper if you're either unaware of traditional or natural helping mechanisms, or if you disregard them. So that's also important to keep in mind. So to reiterate, there are no right ways of coping. There are no right ways of appraising a situation. And your exploration of stressors and appraisal and coping has to be tailored, and has to occur within the context of your relationship with each particular client. So I celebrate the wonderful conversation you're off to, and the fact that you're off to a great start, and I look forward to our ongoing conversation over the semester. So each week I will make a video doing what I'm doing now, reflecting on the previous week, so that we can all kind of weave together and draw together our experiences. I found a most amazing video on stress just this week, and I'm going to post it on our main page on further readings and resources. It is a documentary that features, that is a combination of efforts of National Geographic and Robert Sapolsky, who's the foremost stress researcher at the moment, and it's quite engaging and brilliant. So I'm going to post that tonight.